Yeah, I'm gonna start recording. Okay. Hello, everyone. Today, the 4Ns research team is launching a series of live streams that will feature interdisciplinary discussions on the development of open web and crypto. And as a first event, we have the pleasure to discuss the development of open web in Africa with John Karanja, a Kenyan entrepreneur, CEO and co-founder of Melanin Solar and Bithub Africa. These are two projects that aim at driving sustainable energy access across Africa and foster the adoption of blockchain technology across the continent. Moreover, John is also the director and co-founder of Space Kenya Networks Limited, which is one of the most important advisory firms in greenfield digital technologies in the East African region. So welcome, John. We're very excited to have you here. And I think that as a way to start our discussion, you could introduce the projects that you're currently working on, how they're addressing challenges in regards to energy access across Africa, and also then we can move to discuss what makes the African continent a particularly fertile land for the blossoming of open web. So I'll leave you the floor, John.
All right, thank you very much. A big thank you to 4NTS community for inviting me to speak today. I think Ariana made the sort of full introduction of myself, but I would say as a co-founder and CEO of Melanin Solar and Bithub Africa, we've been around in the African community for the past 7 years, focusing on driving the adoption of blockchain technology, and in particular, initially Bitcoin. And we did this by doing meetups across the African continent, where we visited 7 African countries and held meetups with communities there, introducing the opportunity of blockchain technology in terms of it being an open protocol and facilitating the next iteration of the web. So blockchain and cryptocurrencies are bringing about what we call Web 3.0. And in particular, Bitcoin has been able to be very useful within this community. And we are focused on seeing how we can use this technology in driving energy access. So one of the key projects that we've done recently is called the WIVE protocol, which we've been able to build with our community and deploy across the African continent, actually across the world. As a protocol, we have miners across 30 countries who've been able to come on board. And we're excited about bringing this opportunity to the near protocol community, the global community, to see how we can enhance adoption of sustainable energy.
And maybe you can tell us, like, what are the challenges in regards to energy access across Africa? Because maybe not everybody that is going to listen to this live stream are familiar with what exactly you are tackling with your project.
I think for this, allow me to share a presentation that I've made that sort of highlights what's going on in the space. You guys can see that?
Yes.
So this presentation is entitled Driving Sustainable Energy Adoption Across Africa Using Blockchain Technology. And as I mentioned before, this has been our focus for the past 7 years in terms of driving sustainable energy access within Africa. And one of the main reasons is we have a huge challenge across the African continent. About 70% of the population, which is 625 million people, do not have reliable access to energy on a day-to-day basis. And this is a huge part of the world's population, about 17% of the population. Yet at the same time, we have an untapped solar energy market that's worth 2 trillion. And the reason that we have this challenge is there's not been enough investment in terms of capital expenditure in energy across the African continent. And as a result, what you see, people who have brought solar to the continent, is they use a debt-driven model in order to drive adoption of this technology on the continent. So at Bithub Africa, we saw this huge opportunity in terms of what blockchain technology could do to enhance the adoption of renewable energy. Because once you solve the energy problem, you're solving the problem of education, because people need to have lighting in their homes if they're to educate their kids. People need energy to farm and do irrigation. And of course, people need to transact. So another problem we have on the African continent is people are not able to trade across borders because each country has its own currency. And this introduces what you call friction in terms of transaction and trade. And there's been a great opportunity in terms of what the AU has ratified with the Act that now opens these borders. And at the same time, we've seen the adoption of peer-to-peer model in terms of Bitcoin, which has allowed people to transact across borders. And quite recently, we saw it was a huge debate on the internet. We saw the community in Nigeria has adopted heavily the use of Bitcoin for peer-to-peer and remittance, because Nigeria, I believe, has about a diaspora of about 60 million people who are now beginning to use cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin to send money back home. And in 2020, they were able to move over $500 million. And this made Nigeria the second largest peer-to-peer market in the world after the United States. We've also seen Bitcoin being used as a settlement monetary network, and it is very efficient. You can transact billions of dollars over the Bitcoin network with very low transaction fees. I think this was a couple of weeks ago, $2.4 billion was moved on the network for $26. And this has resulted in what you call a disruption of the trade finance, where you now have a new settlement monetary network that transacts billions of dollars at very low costs. And we've also seen, I'm sure you've seen, there's a huge debate about Bitcoin mining, how it's going to use up all the world's energy and contribute to carbon pollution. But what we're also seeing is the adoption of renewables. 70% of Bitcoin miners, or 74% of Bitcoin miners, use renewables in their energy mix. And this is making redundant energy projects around the world more viable. So you have Bitcoin miners in China who use hydro dams that are not utilized because it's very expensive to move power from these hydro dams into the communities and cities. So what we've done at Bithub Africa is we've developed a protocol called the WIFE protocol that enhances and adds value on top of what the Bitcoin network is already doing through what we call efficient CPU mining. And in particular, we are now focusing on the new architectures like the ARM architecture that you saw the Apple computing company recently introduce to allow people to mine rewards using smaller mobile computing devices. And this is very powerful in terms of driving the adoption of solar access, because solar energy is mobile energy. We want to have households in villages deploying solar systems and then earning rewards through CPU mining on the WIFE protocol, which then incentivizes them to keep adopting solar energy. And this way we solve the huge challenge of energy access across the African continent. Some of our token metrics is we have a 20-year proof of work mining schedule whereby 100 million WIFE rewards will be mined by the year 2040. And this gives us enough time to distribute the solar microgrid ecosystems across the world. our protocol is also a Bitcoin. Holding or holding 0.2 or more Bitcoins can claim the wide rewards in April of this year. And this is about 18 million wide rewards. Yeah, so in terms of milestones, we're just about to release the next version of the protocol, which will have full features deployed. And this should be in April, like I mentioned before. And we're just looking for, different engineers from other communities who are interested in this CPU model of incentivizing energy adoption to come on board with us and start mining and enhancing the security of the protocol. Yeah. So as I mentioned before, we are looking to deploy across the 700,000 already existing solar sites on the African continent. And some of the countries that I've talked about are mentioned here. And right now, this market is worth about $60 billion, and it has a potential size of $2 trillion. So this is a huge opportunity for those of you who are investors, for those of you who are interested in making an impact in terms of solving a very huge challenge on the continent. So just to show you a bit of our solution, we have what we call a smart box that we've deployed that integrates blockchain and IoT technology. And this smart box is deployed at these households who can then begin to share the cost of energy. Because remember, one of the challenges with solar is the initial capital expenditure is quite expensive. So you need to have a way to incentivize communities to come together and invest in a solar system whereby they come and share the energy with each other. And blockchain now comes in to remove trust barriers. It brings down transactional and operational costs. It decentralizes production and transmission and consumption of the solar energy. And this allows multiple providers to come and exist and distribute these excess energy. Of course, this solution is automated because we want it to be able to work with people who are not necessarily technologically savvy, and they can sort of transact energy with each other at the press of a button. And when we achieve this, we'll now have an open peer-to-peer market where transactions are transparent, verifiable, and secure. So we need, like I mentioned before, we need people across the world to come together in order for this to succeed. We need people to deploy nodes. I'm sure if you look at other protocols like the NEAR protocol, deployment of nodes is very important. And in this case, we need people to deploy what we call lightning hubs to provide liquidity. Remember, I mentioned in Nigeria, there's already $500 million of liquidity in terms of Bitcoin on a yearly basis. So these lightning hubs will be able to enhance or to scale up transactions from thousands of transactions per day to millions of transactions per day. We need more miners on the network, and mining wide is fairly easy with the CPU technology. And we also need more engineers to come on board. And this is something we are very passionate about at Bithub Africa, is bringing people on board as engineers to come and actually deploy these distributed technologies.
John?
Yes?
Can I just jump in here real quick? Are you changing the slides? Because I don't think we're seeing, we're still on the first slide. So I'm not sure we're changing the slides or not.
Can you see them move?
We're still on the first slide. It's the first thing that we see.
Okay. Let me see. Are you able to see them change now?
No.
All right. Just a second. I'm sorry about that. Yeah. 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 Got you. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. So yeah. So I'll just recap what I was saying on this slide is to achieve sort of the success that I mentioned is we need more contributors because protocols thrive on contributors. We need more people to contribute in terms of liquidity, and this is through deploying hubs on the network. We need more miners who are actually sort of securing the system, and we need more engineers to develop these user-friendly applications that can then be deployed in the field. So my next slide sort of shows how that looks like on the field. So this is a deployment that we're doing, we're working on recently. The picture to the left shows the engineers that we've trained at Bithub Africa who are now deploying the system on the field. And the picture on the right shows the Melanin Solar Smart Box integrated with the traditional solar system. So before I conclude, I want to leave the community with the next steps. If you want to sort of learn more and see more what I've been talking about, you can visit the protocol website, which is wive.io. We do have a Telegram group, which is t.me/wive.io. For those who want to be engineers, you can visit the Melanin Academy, which is our academy. And the Telegram group is t.me/Bithub Africa. And those are my personal contacts for those who want to reach out to me. So to conclude, at Bithub Africa and Melanin Solar, we sort of tick all the boxes. We've brought together a vast blockchain community across the African continent. We have identified a huge market need. We are building strategic partnerships in order to achieve success. And we are, of course, using disruptive technology. So if you want to learn more, come and chat with us. Our door is always open. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for this really sort of elaborate and detailed sort of, I guess, sort of exposure on the project that you're doing. I think one of the questions that I was wondering, or the disease that I had, is that you definitely are tackling a critical need, right? That like in terms of like energy distribution and energy access. And I was curious in terms of like, in your experience, like how well have you noticed the level of adoption of such technology within the society, within the community? And I wonder if like you've seen in the same way how micro lending startup scenes like M-Pesa and credits alone, if people have been more, at least have taken an approach that would like benefit these companies that are building these blockchain-based solutions, coming from already the wide adoption of mobile money and mobile transaction. And I was wondering, like, how are people seeing these projects coming into societies, coming in these communities, and providing these critical needs? And if you've noticed, I guess maybe more challenges or kind of a smooth adoption towards that.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. Of course, Kenya has been known for what we call digital money. We had the first use case of widely used digital money, which is M-Pesa. And it was not an accident that M-Pesa, when it began about 16 years ago, began and succeeded in Kenya, because it had been tried out in other countries. I believe it had been tried out in Romania and in the Philippines without much success. So what makes the African continent unique is that there's a huge need. You have people living their rural areas, they leave their mothers and grandmothers behind and their cousins behind, and they come into the cities to look for work. And the people back home in the villages need access to money because they're not financially included. So what M-Pesa did in Kenya was allow people for the first time to send money digitally over a network. And it actually began by people sending airtime. So airtime became a currency. And then, like I remember I used to send money up country by putting it in an envelope, giving it to my cousin. And then my cousin removes a few notes and then gives the balance to my grandmother. So we had something called cousin tax, which Kevin might be familiar with. So now with M-Pesa, that problem was solved, where you could send money directly. Now, the problem with M-Pesa is it's not really scalable beyond the Kenyan borders. Yet at the same time, we have this problem in other parts of Africa that are sort of lagging behind. So this is where we see Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general picking up the slack of what mobile money cannot do. And the biggest use case has been Nigeria, where we're seeing now millions of dollars being transacted by the Nigerian people on an yearly basis, peer-to-peer. So what this says is if you're going to have now energy access and people need to share the costs of this energy using our model at Melanin Solar, then you need to deploy this on blockchain because people cannot keep manual ledgers. It's cumbersome, it's difficult. You're relying on too much on trust. So you need to now have a trustless system. And at the same time, you need to incentivize people to adopt this technology because it's new technology and it's cumbersome technology. So right now where we are is we're in the initial stages. Blockchain and cryptocurrencies as part of the open web are sort of immature technologies. We need a lot of work to be done across the world, and that work is being done to educate people on the benefits of this technology. I think the challenge, like I mentioned before, is in Africa, we don't have people deploying nodes. We don't have miners. Whether, of course, Bitcoin needs huge investments. And I mentioned the big corporations that run the hydro dams in Africa can see that as an opportunity. And then we also need smaller micro mining models, which WIFE provides, for example. We also need engineers. So training is a huge part of our rollout strategy. So for the open web 3.0 to succeed, in addition to innovation, we need education, and we need training, and we need investment in youth capacity, because the African continent is a young continent. 60% of the people are under the age of 25. So that's a huge resource that we need to tap into to see these technologies get adopted.
And actually, I was curious to ask you, like, what is the institutional environment in Kenya for the adoption of these technologies? Is it like, how is the government as well responding to that? Do they see that as a potential to invest in, or what is the normative, what is the law background for these kind of technologies?
Yeah, so I think that's a critical question. On the African continent, unfortunately, many of the governments remain skeptical about cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology, because a lot of what we've seen in the early days, like with any open technology, is sort of a lot of speculation. And in some cases, though much less than in traditional legacy systems, we've seen these technologies being used for criminal activities in terms of scamming. But again, I add the caveat that less than 1% of what happens on the Bitcoin network is anything criminal, and cash tends to be used more by criminals around the world. So blockchain does improve that by providing providing transparency. So they have sort of released a statement saying that they don't understand the technology, they don't see why it's relevant. And the challenge for us as sort of entrepreneurs and technologists is to show the real use cases of this technology that can actually help improve the situation on the ground. But I think this situation will change very quickly because we're beginning to see corporations, mainly in the United States for now, beginning to see the potential of Bitcoin technology in terms of what I mentioned before, payments and scaling payments. And I'm optimistic in terms of the future on us being able to, address the issues that remain in terms of adoption of these technologies from a legal and regulatory perspective, and begin to see the actual use cases on the ground where we are seeing the benefits of this technology.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I remember reading upon this, and I think you mentioned this as well at the Blockchain Summit in Nairobi in 2018 about Bitange Ndemo, the chairman of Distributed Ledger and AI. He definitely seems to have at least understood or looking forward towards implementing or suggesting blockchain type solutions for the government. And I'm wondering how essential it is for the government to understand the value of blockchain in terms of how fast it will be adopted, and also in terms of funding. Whether I wonder if you've also noticed for entrepreneurs in Kenya, or even maybe outside of Kenya, like how often they've been, I guess, slowed down, or the developments have been restricted in terms of how slowly, I guess, their governments are understanding these projects and understanding these technologies, because of the fact that they're quite depending on the fundings, right? They need funding from somewhere, and if it is not banks, it could be potentially, government. But I wonder, like, that kind of tension, how you have maybe seen that in your experience, and what you think as entrepreneurs or as people who are passionate about this can do about it, just to kind of, like, I guess, educate about the technologies and the adoption of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the question, and that is the challenge we faced the past 7 years. In terms of getting funding, it's been a huge challenge, certainly for us. But sort of the tokenization model makes it a bit easier, because when you're able to tokenize markets, you're creating sort of a bottom-up approach in terms of financing. So blockchain applications, or true blockchain applications, have the ability to self-finance, because as adoption increases, and people begin to use these tokens, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's the Wive reward token, or any other token in any other protocol, demand drives valuations of these networks. And in turn, that creates now a positive cycle where these networks begin to fund their own evolution and their own development, which is in part why I don't really agree with the Bitcoin maximalism sort of thesis, where the people who take the extreme view that Bitcoin is the only sort of network that can be tokenized. I think it is the standard, it is a store of value, but there are other niche markets, many in Africa, that we are beginning to identify, such as energy. There are other spaces where it can become more relevant, where you can now use this tokenization model to self-finance and grow your true networks and grow value on the ecosystem. Of course, there's a caveat of having sort of some self-regulation mechanisms to fight the scams or to fight criminal activities. And in this regard, we have a platform called cointest.com and cointest.ai that we're working on, that creates more transparency and accountability in terms of protocols, of course, starting with the Wive protocol and Bitcoin protocol, through what we call an authorization process, where transactions are stored immutably on the blockchain, so they can act as a source of truth of what really happened. So the challenge, having said that, is we need to train as many engineers and developers to understand these opportunities, so that they don't have to wait for investment or capital or any sort of permission from anyone to begin testing the ideas. Web 3.0 is open, it's permissionless, and permissionless ecosystems allow for innovation. And the African sort of entrepreneurs and African developers need to understand this because we can see what's happening in the West. A lot of projects are coming out. Of course, majority seem very, they seem very sketchy, but there are good gems in there. So we should not be afraid to grab this opportunity as well. And I mean, we've done our best to bring in as many people into the fold as through our training programs. But the blockchain and cryptocurrencies sort of tokenization model is a game changer.
Yeah, 100%. I definitely do agree, and it definitely incentivizes, I guess, entrepreneurs to not just wait for necessarily the government, but to work on your own project and sort of develop that and kind of trust that eventually your model is going to become more accepted and people are going to see the value of it. I think there's a lot of people that will be watching, that are watching this stream, that may not be aware completely about sort of the crypto community or the crypto scene in Nairobi or even in Kenya. And I wonder, with your experience with Bithub, obviously Milan Bithub and Bithub Africa, whatnot, and the training sessions and the coaching that you've provided, can you give us like maybe a picture or kind of illustrate us a little bit what does the crypto scene look like in Nairobi? And if people would go, and would visit, what can they expect of young entrepreneurs or, young women and men that are actually involved in various kinds of projects?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because when we began our meetups 7 years ago, we could count the number of people in the space on one hand, and we sort of all knew each other. But today, because of our efforts and the efforts of others, the community is so huge that we have what we call silos, which is now becoming another problem. We have people who are exclusive on one platform, on, for example, people exclusive on Bitcoin, others are exclusive on Ethereum, others are exclusive on Celo. Celo is a huge community here. So what we need to do now is interconnect these communities, because these projects, we're not fighting each other. We're all trying to solve this huge problem, which is access to opportunities and access to resources using blockchain technology. So in as much it's good that we have grown, we now need to begin to identify real problems and then collaborate, because collaboration is key. We don't want to have a situation where many different groups are trying to do the same thing when they could have worked together through synergy to become more cost efficient and become more sort of successful in terms of what they're doing. The other thing we need to do is we need to interconnect the African continent. And one huge challenge we have here is the language barriers. So my co-founder, Christian Kakoba, is from DRC. He initially spoke French. So in order for him and I to work together and found Melanin Solar, he had to learn English. So there's a challenge in terms of language barrier, because a lot of the problems we have here, they're the same problem. The problem you have in Kiambu in Kenya is the same problem we'll have in Katanga in Congo. It's the same problem we'll have in Timbuktu in Mali, which is access to resources that are very plentiful on the African continent. So we now need to begin to look at now creating open communities using the open web, where we have technologies that allow people to translate content and share this content with each other. Because Kenya as a market will not be very interesting to investors by itself. So we need to pull together different countries together. And just in East Africa, you have Rwanda, where they speak mostly French, Congo, where they speak mostly French. You have Tanzania, where they speak mostly Swahili. You have Kenya, where they speak both English and Swahili. You have Somalia, where they speak Somali. So that's one of the challenges that people don't really talk about, is that the communities in Africa are generally fractured due to the effects of colonization. So blockchain technology and open web allows us to solve this problem or to decolonize these communities by just giving them access to things that other people around the world have. I think the classic example is China. China, as a big homogeneous market of 1.3 billion people, is now dominant in every aspect of blockchain and cryptocurrencies. And does the rest of the world want China to be dominant by itself? No. We need to have different players and different regions of the world come up together on this sort of global platform. Yeah.
That's a really interesting point that you're bringing in terms of language that I haven't really even thought through yet. And I guess maybe the question that people may have is in terms of how is that being solved with I guess with blockchain technology, the barrier that languages bring forth for entrepreneurs, like you say, that are in Katanga, DRC, that want to connect with other entrepreneurs that are in Nairobi, Kenya. Although they may be using technologies and platforms and smart grids that allows them to maybe trade various kinds of goods or transactions, but how far or how much do you see the language being a barrier or a challenge, I guess, in terms of trade, in terms of collaboration, maybe in your experience as well?
Yeah, a great question. The barrier remains a problem at the user interface or the user experience level. When you talk about now payments or transactions, you now have global monetary networks like Bitcoin. You now have platforms that allow global CPU mining like Hive. You have protocols where people can build web solutions like, for example, the NEAR protocol, which is sort of addressing that issue. So these protocols have a common language, which is digital. So the digital problem has been solved. So what remains is if somebody wants to go and trade, if somebody in Mali who speaks French wants to go across or in Cameroon who speaks French wants to go across the border and trade with a Nigerian, they can trade over the Bitcoin network, no problem, because it's not two currencies. It's not the Cameroonian franc, it's not the Nigerian naira. It's one currency that is interoperable with even the currencies, because you have wallets that exchange naira to Bitcoin, and you have wallets that exchange the Cameroonian currency to Bitcoin. So that problem has been solved. So we now need to build now application or apps where now I can be able to translate what somebody is saying in a certain language to another language, layered on top of blockchain technology. And I think when people begin to see those technologies, including government, they begin to appreciate the power of blockchain as one of the technologies that can unite, for example, the African continent, or that can also be intercontinent, can allow Africans to trade with Europeans, allow Africans to trade with Chinese on more open networks. So for me, it's just a user experience issue where you create interoperability using applications.
So I would like to ask, given the human capital that Africa has, and also the physical capital, and it seems that the blockchain adoptions are really moving at fast pace in Africa. So I was wondering, how do you see this going in the next 5 to 10 years? What is the idea that you would see for the development of these technologies?
Yeah, this is something that excites me a lot, because we say in crypto that 1 month feels like 1 year. I'm sure you all have that experience where the amount of stuff that has happened in 1 month is like almost too much. But that's mostly good from my perspective. But it also creates a challenge where you're just having too much information coming at you at any given time. The good thing about this is it allows for multiple experimentation. So if I tried, for example, to build an application on top of the traditional banking infrastructure, I have to go to the bank and plead for access. And this is something I literally did for many years, trying to build applications on top of bank infrastructure. If you don't have huge capital outlays, you're not going to succeed, and especially in Africa. In fact, in Africa, you have no chance, because in many places, the banks don't even exist. They don't have a branch near your village or near your location. So the open web, blockchain, cryptocurrencies allows people to experiment very quickly and fail quickly. If you are a techpreneur, if you are running startups, failing quickly or failing forward is a huge element of success, because in my case, it took about 14 iterations of different startup ideas to arrive at one that got some traction within the community. So experimentation and innovation has been scaled up and has been made quicker by these technologies.
There's a point that you mentioned quite often in terms of the need of developers and I guess skilled people to develop and to actually sort of conduct certain applications and whatnot. And I wonder how much of a gap, just to kind of for us to have a perspective of that, how much of a gap is this within the community or within the industry? And how much looking at the gap, how challenging has it been to still develop certain applications, to still develop certain protocols? And I think especially, the question is quite suited for you having started Bithub Academy, Bithub Africa and Mellon Academy, and you are training, developing skills, and you are setting, I guess, this, or at least providing this education. But I guess maybe if you could give us maybe a perspective of how big the problem is this right now in Africa.
Yeah, it's a very huge problem, because when about I think 3 years ago, we decided to map how many Bitcoin, not even developers, Bitcoin engineers, people who can deploy nodes and run nodes across the African continent, and there were less than 50. Yeah, and most of those 50 were in South Africa, in Cape Town. So we've actually had no Africans, or what we call indigenous Africans, involved in the space. So one of the challenges is the huge cost in terms of training. But luckily, we've seen a lot of initiatives by different protocols, whether it's Ethereum, the Ethereum community is quite strong, to train people on different aspects of technology, whether it's smart contracts, for example. We train on engineering, deploying nodes, and we're now beginning to see an acceleration, and we're targeting ourselves to train 2,000 engineers within the next, by 2025, that's the next 4 years, to deploy these melanin solar solutions across the African continent. 2,000 is a good number, but it's not enough. So that's why I say one protocol by itself cannot meet the whole market, because the opportunity is so huge. It's a $2 trillion market on energy alone, and there are other markets as well. So what we need is, we need people to begin to realize that there's a huge pool of talent in Africa that can develop solutions for the rest of the world and for Africa. And for protocols to come in and invest in actually training these people, these young people, spend time with them, learn their challenges, and we'll see a very hyper growth of the digital economy in Africa. In Nigeria, despite all the challenges and the restrictions they have there, the Bitcoin ecosystem is now heading towards $1 billion valuation. And when you ask me what's going to happen in the next 5 years, we're not really talking about 5 years, we're talking about 3 years, that we now be entering a place where you have, for the first time in African history, industries worth billions of dollars, enriching the lives of the African people, making people more wealthy, making Africans have a seat at the table and trade with their fellow counterparts in Europe, in China, in the United States, and the rest of the world, because we have a lot to offer. We have a rich, diverse culture that has not been tapped into in terms of the innovations that can come from that. In fact, I usually say, and I mean, it's just not myself, if you solve, for example, distributed energy access in Kenya and in Africa, as you're trying to do, you solve it around the world, because the challenge is biggest in Africa. So if the solution works in Africa, it's definitely going to work in Australia, in China, in Europe. So there is very huge market opportunities here, but we need people to sort of begin to realize and invest in themselves, invest in their own education as Africans, and then we need partners to come in and sort of invest in these opportunities, and we create value that we can share together, instead of just the old sort of extractive model where Africa is just seen as a place where you get resources and then you leave.
Go for it, Ariana. So you wanted to ask something? Go for it. Bye-bye.
Definitely the development of these technologies in Africa is very exciting, and the potential is huge. And I think that now they're beginning to realize like how huge of a potential there is in the African continent. And I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what is going to happen like in the near future. And I don't know whether we have questions from the people that are watching the live stream. Maybe that would be like a good moment for a Q&A session.
At the moment, I'm not seeing questions immediately. Some might come, but I think in the I guess in the meantime, I was thinking about a question. I think I was going to develop more in terms of like, I was going to add up more into like the development team and the engineers, and I feel like I wonder whether one of the incentives towards which I guess there's a lack of developers and there's a lack of engineers in terms of the motivation to be skilled in such an industry. If people are not really convinced, or people not really, I guess, seeing the value in it, or maybe still skeptical, whether you've noticed that maybe resistance from young kids who may not be seeing the value, who may not be seeing really the benefits of being skilled, or being, I guess, trained within, or at least have the skills to apply, to develop certain protocols, or at least join the community. And I wonder if you've seen that, if you've seen still the doubt. Although people are aware, obviously, of the trading aspect, but it's one thing to trade Bitcoin, it's another thing to actually have the skills to develop, and being an engineer and have actually sort of like knowledge of that industry. So I don't know, maybe I was wondering, maybe you can speak about that, if you've noticed still resistance for the younger population, or is that changing?
Yeah, great question. I think I would answer it this way. There has been some inertia in terms of looking at opportunities, especially on the internet. And it has been justifiable, because when you look at sort of the history of Bitcoin adoption in Africa, there was a period where a lot of scams were, or some people were using Bitcoin nefariously to scam other people. So Bitcoin, for a time, got tainted with that idea of it being a scam. But as the market has continued to grow, and people can access this information on Twitter. They can see, for example, Elon Musk getting into Bitcoin. There is now a sense of validation in terms of what we have been trying to educate people about for this past time. So I think that has been a problem, but it's a problem that thankfully is going away through the education and through the material and content that we put out there. But then, like I mentioned before, we still need, as an industry, to have some self-regulation mechanisms, which is why we have the coin test project to test projects using technology fundamentals. And we'll see then more and more adoption out there. Then as we see more success stories, perhaps from Bithub Africa or from other people developing opportunities, then more people will begin to sort of dive into the space after they see their fellow counterparts becoming more successful. So this is a challenge that can only be solved through time and through hard work over time. So I'm more optimistic. And Nigeria has shown the world the way in terms of the real use cases of Bitcoin technology as a way to allow for cross-border finance and also as store value in terms of protecting some of their own assets. So yeah, I think the space is moving forward. I think we are over the worst parts or the most dangerous parts. So I think looking forward, within the next 3 years, we should see more adoption and more people diving into the space.
And I think that another question that might be interesting would be like, what do you think would be the desirable attitude of governments? What could to promote the adoption of these solutions, which are very beneficial for the population? Like, what would you like to see from that?
Yeah, I think governments need to look at it as a unique and unprecedented opportunity to grow the size of their economies holistically by growing the size of the digital economy. So what I mean is countries that choose to turn themselves into blockchain hubs, like Estonia, for example, is a good example. Dubai is another good example, will attract investment. And in this case, it's billions of dollars in investment that can then be used to train their, African governments, they don't lack a pool of talent because there's a lot of young people around. So if they can attract investment, whether it's in large-scale mining, for example, at the big energy projects in DRC or in Ethiopia, they can now generate income through taxation policies that can also be attractive and bring other companies to base their operations in these countries. So for me, it's an investment opportunity like any other investment opportunity. The countries that sort of see that will be the ones that move ahead in the 21st century. Of course, some countries will choose to take a negative stance against the technology. My hope is that they also evolve and see the opportunities that a lot of people around the world are seeing. So I think good policy in terms of adopting disruptive technology, creating regulations that attract investment and also increase incomes for these governments, I think that's the way to go.
That was actually a brilliant question, Ariana. And I think added on that, there was actually someone who has the question. He didn't manage to put it on the chat, but I can repeat it for him. He was asking, what would you think the long-term vision is for bringing an open web to East Africa, and whether you think that Kenya is well positioned to be sort of a true Silicon Valley, or Silicon Savannah in that sort of industry or in that space?
Yeah, I think to start with the latter part of your question, Kenya definitely has all the ingredients in terms of what's needed to become a true blockchain hub. And the answer I gave to Ariana's question is policy needs to follow these ingredients because we need a holistic approach. The techpreneurs are not going to do this by themselves. We need to have formalization of rules of this industry to allow us to go mainstream. So we, as Bithub Africa, participated in the blockchain and AI task force that was headed by Dr. Bitanga Ndemo that you, Kevin, mentioned some time back. And we gave our own recommendations in terms of how we could make Kenya a true hub for blockchain and other technologies. So I think what will happen is probably one country around the world will take a favorable stance on this technology, and you begin to see that country sort of thriving, and then that will sort of make other countries question why these countries are thriving. And with time, I think more positive regulations and more positive policies will come through those initiatives. I think the best market for blockchain and cryptocurrencies is definitely the African market, because the youth factor, having huge numbers of youth are all digital and they have digital aspirations. They are going to adapt these technologies more than any other people across the world.
That's a very powerful point, and I definitely think that there's a lot of statistics that backs that up. Just the increase of the population, how fast mobile payments has been adopted. People are already aware of that. People already are, I guess, used to that kind of transaction. So Bitcoin and blockchain is only like I would say a doorway or step away from that. That's a really good point. Yeah, I'm looking if we may have other questions. I don't know, Ariana, if you had anything else in mind or any other questions that you would want to ask.
I think that we have covered a lot for now. It was a very interesting conversation and dense with a lot of information on the scene of blockchain's development in Africa, and I really enjoyed this conversation.
I did as well. Thank you very much.
So thank you for participating, and we'll definitely follow up with you. And yeah, it was a very nice beginning of roundtable, I think.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. We look forward to great partnerships and growth of this industry of ours. Yeah. Asante.
Asante sana, John. Thank you so much for being here with us. Appreciate that.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.